Welcome one and all to the Stock Up Podcast, your one-stop shop for stocking up on the information you need to qualify for the Pro Tour. My name is Alex. I am joined today, as always, by my co-host, Jacob Negro. Jacob, how goes?
Good. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm all right. How'd you do in the arena qualifier?
I played Demir, which I posted about on Patreon. I did end up switching, and I went 3-3. But I played one match in the morning, one match at lunch, and 4 matches in a car with bad internet. Though the internet, even though it cost me a game, I did win that match. But not my full heart.
I didn't. I had my own difficulties where it was so early in the morning. I don't usually wake up that early.
Yeah.
But I got up, drank coffee. I didn't do great. I also went 3-3 with my blue-black control deck.
Gotcha.
No need to LARP on it, but I didn't run particularly well. We'll just say that. I had some
I actually went
games,
1-2 against Cauldron, so maybe I misassessed my deck choice entirely.
Yeah, maybe. I actually beat a Cauldron deck. I lost to the only time one of the matches that I lost and I didn't feel like I got unlucky was against a Jeskai control deck, and they just had like 7 main deck counters.
Oh, yeah.
2 Jeskai Revelations and a Chandra.
I beat Blue-White Control and Jeskai Control with Demir, and it's like the opposite, where like they were playing, stupid cards like that, and I'm just playing Demir and turn 3 Kaidoing them. I remember I duress someone and their hand was all counter spells in the stock up, and I just took the stock up and turn 3 Kaidoed them on the play. And I'm like, I don't know about any counter spells against Demir, let alone like the 3 in their hand.
3 steps ahead and negate,
yeah, stuff like that. Yeah.
So that was a matchup where I definitely felt hopeless. The other 2 were sort of mana problems, but yeah, I'm looking forward to moving on for the next set now that format's essentially over. With Edge of Eternities coming out, we're gonna have rotation, and we're going to talk about that next week. And this week we're just going to do our top 10 cards that we think will have an impact on mostly all formats.
Yeah,
mostly in general,
constructed. This isn't really about limited at all, but
exactly. Yeah, not limited. It's for constructed. I mostly play standard, so I kind of look at things through a standard lens. I'm sure there's a couple cards that may be applicable in modern.
Yeah, I try to keep it only to standard and modern and a little bit of Pioneer. That's mostly all I'm thinking about when I make this list. So
yeah, interestingly, Pioneer is mostly just a crossover with standard. It's like the best standard cards maybe make it to Pioneer sort of thing.
Yeah,
so I think of it.
There's some holdovers, but yeah, that's right now. With Mono Red being one of the best decks in Pioneer, it certainly feels that way.
Yeah. So before we get started, I want to remind everyone that you can find us over on patreon.com/stockuppodcast. I also want to thank each and every patron who's already signed up over there. We really appreciate it. Our tier is $1 a month, and for that you get access to our Discord as well as all of our exclusive posts that we post just to Patreon and nowhere else. Of course, you could always just watch us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, etc. So without further ado, do you have any honorable mentions, Jacob, before we get started with our top 10s?
Yeah, so first let me clarify. Neither of us put the 5 Shocklands on our list. We agreed not to do that. These are reprints. They're obviously going to matter a ton in Standard. And if we really had to rank them, we might both put all of them as our most impactful cards in the format for Standard. Even over all the spells.
They don't often print dual lands that are that strong. They do occasionally.
Yeah.
But it's going to be nice to have them back. Mana in the last format wasn't great.
And the fact that it's a seemingly 5 random Shocklands I think it's going to be a big deal for Standard on what decks are actually playable or not. I think, and we'll probably get into this more on the next episode, but I think some decks that are 3 colors could potentially have better mana than certain 2-color combinations. So
I bet, yeah. Hopefully that
the allied 2-color combination decks are losing 2 different lands, and if they're not getting a Shocklands, then they're kind of in trouble.
Right. Whereas 3-color decks that have access to 2 Shocklands are going to be sitting pretty.
Yeah, and some of the 3-color decks still have access to 2. They have access to 2 Shocklands and 2 fast lands. So
I wonder what made him decide to do that. It's kind of an odd decision.
Yeah, and then someone pointed out to me too, the next 2 sets are Spider-Man and Avatar, which are kind of weird homes to print something like Steam Vents in, but maybe they could make it do. But
maybe they felt like they could fit like Hollowed Fountain Steam Vents in those sets, but maybe they couldn't fit something like Godless Shrine.
Maybe that would make sense
based on the names.
I
don't know. That might not.
That could totally be true though.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, yeah, you asked me about honorable mentions, so I have two, which is kind of cheating, but I'll explain them. So the first one is really boring, and it was on my list for a long time. Probably would be around 5th or 6th place on my list, but it's a reprint, and I think it's mostly a sideboard card, and that's a null.
So I was gonna put it on my honorable mentions too. It's funny enough.
Yeah, so I think a null will see a ton of play. It's a reprint originally from Urza's Saga, but also a few other sets. It's legal in Pioneer already, so clearly one of those sets. It's a single blue mana. It's an instant, and it says counter target artifact or enchantment spell. Just straight up. There are a ton of really good artifacts and enchantments in Standard, and honestly, if this card saw a little bit of main deck play, it wouldn't surprise me, especially if there's still a Cauldron-like deck with a lot of rummaging. Steam Core Scholar is friends with random instant sorceries too, so, being a little narrow for a huge upside of a swing, there's these talents and annex and cauldron, and there's some artifacts in this set. There's a lot going on. So
yeah, they've really been pushing enchantments in particular in the last few sets, the last year or two, honestly.
Yeah, and they just banned up the Beanstalk and Corey Steelcutter. Those would have been hits too. So
right.
Cost
it's a little boring. It would have been high on my list, but there's so many cards I felt like the power level of all the good cards was relatively flat, and I couldn't decide what to put on my list, so I just moved this to honorable mention since it's a reprint.
Yeah. Anyways, my cool card, which is a card that I'm hoping will see play, but I really couldn't think it was going to be a top 10, and it's loading, is a Possibility Technician.
Oh, I like that guy.
I'm going to read this. It's 2 and a red for a 3/3 creature, Kavu Artificer. It says, whenever this creature or another Kavu you control enters, exile the top card of your library. For as long as it remains exiled, you may play it if you control a Kavu. And it has Warp for 1 and a red. I'm going to read Warp. I'm going to guess we won't really read it again the rest of this episode. Warp. You may cast this card from your hand for its Warp cost. Exile this creature at the beginning of the next end step. Then you may cast it from exile on a later turn. So it's kind of similar to Adventure, where you get this ETB or whatever the Warp card is trying to do. And then it goes away at the end step, and notably you could crew with it, or if you give these things haste, or you could even sack them to things if you don't want to exile them for later. You can kind of use the body for 1 turn. They don't inherently have haste though. So in the case of this card, it has an ETB, and maybe if you squeaked in another Kavu, which could matter if you draw these in multiples, you could get more cards out of them. I just think it's kind of a cool card advantage card. I haven't looked at a full list of Kavus in Standard, but do you want to guess what I think the best Kavu in Standard is?
Yeah, I know what it is. It's the land.
Yeah, Soulstone Sanctuary is a thing you can turn on later. That'll be a Kavu. The Possibility Technician could have already died. It still remembers that you can cast that card or play that card from exile as long as you control a Kavu. So perhaps later in the game, on your opponent's end step, you turn on your Soulstone, and then you go to your turn and you get to cast that card again. So it's that combination of cards at least makes me think, it's hard to deny the card advantage from this card in a later game, in a long game. And they work well in multiples.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. You can kind of play it on curve if you don't have anything on 2. And then maybe if you hit a land, you can save it until turn 4 to play it, and then a land. The only other Kavu I saw in the set that looked playable was the green-red guy who has the landfall text.
Yeah.
So I guess in theory you could put those two in the same deck. He's pretty decent.
Yeah, he might be more decent in older formats with.
This is Tannock Memorial Ensign, 1 red-green for a 2/4, and it only has its landfall ability. Whenever a land you control enters, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. And if this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, you draw a card. So really good with fetch lands or Fabled Passage.
Yeah, and I didn't put it on my list, but I've been playing the green landfall deck in Standard. I've been splashing various colors. Red could be a contender for that, but that deck has a lot of cards that cost 3 or more mana that can be really powerful in that deck, so there's a lot of competition in that slot. But notably, with the Traveling Chocobo, even a normal land would trigger this twice, or you could play Fabled Passage, trigger it twice on your turn, and then twice on your opponent's turn, so it could definitely see play there.
I forgot about that card. That Traveling Chocobo does a lot more than you think. It's easy to throw away that second line of text, but it actually does a lot.
It's about to rotate, but I've been playing Nissa in the sideboard of those decks, boarding in a basic land and boarding out all my elves, and the Nissa just finds Mossborn Hydras.
Nice.
Because they're elementals.
It's an elemental.
Yeah.
Nice.
But that's about to not be an option anymore. But yeah, the Technician could see play. But being a landfall, I just mentioned, you're high on 3-drops, and this is another. It's another 3-drop, the Possibility Technician. So that combination in that way might not really work out.
Yeah. So for my honorable mention, I had a null, but then I also have Kona Rescue Beastie. And I'm being a little cheeky with this one, but let me read it. This is from Duskmorn.
Okay, that's what I thought.
3 and a green, 4/3 survival at the beginning of your second main phase. If Kona Rescue BC is tapped, you may put a permanent card from your hand on the battlefield. So there's a new, really good way in this set to tap this card, and that is these new planet lands. Where'd it go? There it is. So these planet lands, they all enter the battlefield tapped. They're a cycle of mythic rares. There's one for each color. They add a color of the land they are. So there's a black one, blue one, etc. They all have Station 12 plus. So Station is an ability in this set where you can tap a creature you control to put a charge counter equal to that creature's power onto the planet. Station only as a sorcery. And it kind of doesn't really matter what planet you play with this, because I don't think the planets are particularly constructed powered from what I can tell. But let's say you play with the green one, all you have to do is have gotten this into play, and then when you play Kona, you can immediately tap it and get the survival ability from it.
Yeah, it does have to live to your second main phase, but that's true.
Yeah, so they can interact with it if they can kill Kona immediately.
Yeah, I mean, you said it doesn't matter, and I guess I've read the payoffs on those, and they're not particularly strong. The green one, for example, has green tap, add a green for every creature you control. But if you did tap your Kona and then put in an 8-power creature, you would have them potentially available on that turn.
That's true. There you go. So it could matter which one you like. In that case, I mean, the green one's pretty good, right? It's a Gaia's Cradle. The others...
Yeah, once I cheat in a giant 8-power creature, I'm not sure I want a Gaia's Cradle, so...
Gaia's Cradle, you can just... The black one, Void Altar, it has 1 and a black, tap, pay 2 life, sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power. So
there
you
go.
Draw a ton of cards, But
cool, yeah, that makes sense. That's definitely a card, that survival mechanic might matter a lot more. I actually, in the notes for one of my cards in my top 10, I have a card with Survivor as a reference, so...
Gotcha. Yeah, pretty good. Okay, so we'll go on to your number 10.
Okay, so my number 10 is mostly one I'm only looking at Modern, and it's kind of just for fun, but might end up being good, and it's Cosmogoyf. So this is a black and a green, so it's a 2-drop for a Elemental Lurhorgoyf, and it says this creature's power is equal to the number of cards you own in exile, and its toughness is equal to that number plus 1. So obviously referencing Tarmogoyf, but this is only counting cards you own in exile. In Modern, there's a card called Serum Powder that is like a 3-mana artifact that taps for colorless, but it says if it's in your opening hand before you mulligan, you can exile your hand, or before you've kept your hand, rather. So you can do this in the middle of mulligan. You can exile your hand and draw a new hand, basically, and continue mulliganing from there. So that will always exile 7 cards, which means this is suddenly a 2-mana 7/8, which is not the only combo I'm interested in. There's also cards like Inverter of Truth and... it's called Plunge into Darkness, Plunge into Despair. Let me look it up. It's 1 and a black. You basically can pay X life to exile the top X cards of your library, pick one of them, put it in your hand, and the rest stay in exile. I just think there's ways that you can win on turn 3 with this card.
Just because it's so giant.
Because you can make it a 20/20 or larger than your opponent's life total. In combination with a deck that maybe does something else like Relic or Progenitus, so even if you don't draw this combo, it's still Tarmogoyf-like.
That's interesting. I saw this card and I thought there would have to be something that I couldn't think of off the top of my head that would be sort of combo-esque, because obviously you can't just put this and Rest in Peace in your deck in Standard and expect it to be good.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think Modern is really where I'd be looking at this, just because it has this capability of maybe being a turn 3 kill card, but also sort of a fair card.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Nice.
What's your number 10?
I have Singularity Rupture. This is a sorcery, 3 blue, black, so 6 mana. Destroy all creatures, then any number of target players, each mill half their library rounded down. So this card, obviously 6 mana is really expensive for a sweeper, but at least it destroys all creatures, which black doesn't always get sweepers that destroy all creatures. And then lately in Standard, control decks have had these problems where, since many other late game decks in Standard are usually built around these engine cards, that essentially means they never run out of things to do. Sometimes your only way to win the game is through mill. It's why Jace, the Phyrexian mill Jace, has been so prevalent in control decks. Yeah. And now that card's rotating, so it's possible your control deck is going to need some sort of a finisher like that. And blue-black does have the Restless Reef, which can attack and mill. But that's not always going to work, since your opponent, if depending on the composition of their deck, they might have enough removal or demolition fields or whatever to destroy those. So I think possibly in your blue-black control decks, or maybe Esper control decks, we are getting pretty nice Esper shock lands, Watergrave and Godless Shrine. I think you might be required to play one or two of these in the main deck or sideboard, and it might be a pretty important card.
That makes sense. It's kind of, I always think milling half their library won't actually work as a win con, but I suppose if you cast this on curve, and then, as the game gets longer, it's more reasonable.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have thought just people playing Jace and targeting their opponent and milling 15 would do it either, but...
Yeah, but milling 15 wins the game when they have 15 cards in their deck, and this doesn't. So
that's true. And maybe this won't be good enough. My thought was that probably it's going to mill enough cards most of the time that it'll get the job done. Maybe especially in combination with Restless Reef, which is pretty much always going to be in your deck.
Is a big deal, I think.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at.
Control mirrors, that could matter a lot too.
Yeah, and it's interesting if this is good in control mirrors, because it means it's a slot that would normally be kind of blank is actually a good card in your deck. Normally a sweeper against a control mirror is a blank, so that's something too. The format might be fast enough that the creature decks just don't allow you to have a 6-mana sweeper though, so we'll see. What do you got for your next one?
My number 9 is Pinnacle Star Cage. We're going to read it, but this is kind of a temporary lockdown replacement. So it's 1 white for an artifact. It says, when this artifact enters, exile all artifacts and creatures with mana value 2 or less until this artifact leaves the battlefield. And then you can pay 6 white, put each card exiled with this artifact into its owner's graveyard, then create a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token for each card put into a graveyard this way, sacrifice this artifact. So, I think, being an artifact versus being an enchantment, that's about equal in my mind. So it'll be more vulnerable in some ways and less vulnerable in others. Only hitting artifacts and creatures also has some upsides and downsides. It means if you play cards like High Noon or Rest in Peace, or a card that's going to be later on my list called Seam Rip, it's not going to hit those. But your opponent also could have Innkeeper's Talent or Storm Chaser's Talent, and things like that aren't going to get exiled, so a little less coverage. The 8 mana thing, 8's a lot of mana, but when you get to that stage, it's certainly going to be a nice ability to have to activate, not only as a win con, but also to make it less vulnerable, because you'll just permanently get rid of whatever you exiled with it, and also get a lot of 2/2s.
Yeah, so I put this card as number 3 on my list.
Yep.
Like I said with this set, I had a bit of a difficulty differentiating which card should be what number, but this seems one of the strongest cards in the set. I think on balance, I agree with what you said. Of course, with Lockdown, that it's slightly different, it has slightly different upsides and slightly different downsides. I think on balance, it's better. Mostly because you can reliably, that enchantments aren't going to be hit, and you could reliably put 2-mana enchantments in your deck now.
Yep.
To go with it. And white has, a lot of white's removal options is enchantment based nowadays. And sometimes in Pioneer, for instance, the mono white deck plays a lot of the 2-mana exile enchantments, and they also play a Lockdown because Lockdown's really good, even though it's a non-bow. So this does that. And then I think the 8-mana ability is pretty good. I mean, if you happen to hit a lot of things, just being able to make a lot of 2/2s
that could certainly just win you the game too. They're untapped, so that could stabilize you.
Yeah, there's a world, I think, always where this sort of effect just doesn't line up well in the format, in which case maybe it's not that good.
Yep.
But Lockdown was so good for so long that I think it's safe to assume to err on the side of that it will be good. And then Seam Rip, you mentioned, that's the enchantment that's 1 white. I probably would have put it on my list, but since I put Pinnacle Stargate, I sort of thought I would just talk about them at the same time, so I don't...
We can talk about it. For reference, it's actually my number 2 card.
Okay. I mean, it's excellent, yeah.
A 1-mana removal spell is going to matter. So Seam Rip is a enchantment for a single white, and when it enters, you exile target non-land, permanent, and opponent controls with mana value 2 or less. So it has the same text box as Portable Hole, but it's enchantment instead of an artifact. So once again, that's kind of a wash in my mind. Sometimes it's going to be easier to kill, sometimes it's going to be harder to kill. That might be mostly a sideboard card, because there's certainly a lot of decks people could play that don't really have anything that costs 2 or less. But still, I think having access to that cheap removal spell, it can be impactful. It also hits things like Rest in Peace or High Noon if you're a deck that cares about those. it's just been pretty solid. Portable Hole even sees play in Modern because it's an artifact. And, there's Enchantresses in Modern. There's an enchantment-based deck in Pioneer. So this card might see play because it's an enchantment in various older formats. I don't think that'll matter as much as Standard. But, Optimistic Scavenger is still in Standard, so that might not be true.
Yeah. My thought, that is true. The fact that it hits other enchantments and stuff is pretty nice. My thought was kind of like decks that are going to play Pinnacle Stargate might not play Seamrit because they overlap in what they're hitting a lot.
Yeah, but, if you care about like an Innkeeper's talent, then they don't, so that's kind of nice.
That's true. If you have creatures yourself.
Yep.
Yeah, it probably deserved its own number on my list too. To be honest, I just didn't. I was trying to find excuses to take things off my list. So.
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty boring. And at some point, it was my number one, and I just put a much more interesting card that I'm optimistic about at number one. So I'm excited for it.
Nice, cool. Yeah. Okay. So there's a couple cool white removal spells to replace Lockdown and whatnot when those rotate.
Yeah. All right. What's your number 9?
Number 9, I put Ice Till Explorer.
Nice. That's my number 8.
Okay. I've heard some people talk about it, and I've heard pretty controversial things about it. Interestingly enough, some people have thought it was really bad and some really good. I, of course, am kind of boring and think it's somewhere in between. I think it's a strong card. This is 2 green, 2/4. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. You may play lands from your graveyard. And landfall, whenever a land you control enters, mill a card. So, probably mostly you want this in Standard. It's extremely good with Fabled Passage.
Yep.
And other landfall decks. So that's mostly where you're going to want it. Although I can imagine, I think it does enough with Fabled Passage in particular, if you can build your deck with it, that when you play this and get back a fetch land from your graveyard and then are able to just use it several times, I think that provides enough value to be worth it in a non-dedicated landfall deck.
Yeah, I agree. So the reason I have it on my list, though, is definitely because of landfall deck. I've actually been playing a ton of that this week. I don't think it's amazing, but it's definitely been playable, and I'm kind of excited to explore it post-rotation. And, a card like this that basically just says you'll have a never-ending stream of lands is perfect. I don't know if you need 4 copies of it because it's kind of expensive, but, just a few copies might be a big deal. And like you said, I think Fabled Passage and like a combination of Self-Mill, and then the Self-Mill might want Flashback or other cards you can do from your graveyard. You could really more explore the part where this is milling you in your deck.
That's a good point. And then if you have other Self-Mill cards and you don't draw your Fabled Passage, you might still be able to get a land back from your graveyard when you play it.
Yeah, well, you get a land back from your graveyard, and then that land is milling you a card, so you might mill yourself into more lands to then keep playing from your graveyard, even if you don't hit Passage. So that's pretty nice.
Yeah, that's true. This is honestly could be a space you could explore in the Unipile type decks.
Yeah, that being said, it's a 4-mana 2/4, so your board impact is kind of low, but when you're playing a card like Saz's Chocobo, this is kind of perfect in my mind. And I also have to add, like, that landfall package has, Bristly Bill, Chocobo, Tifa, the Mossborn Hydra. But, the Hydra and the Tifa are kind of clunkier cards, but I think Bill and Chocobo could be a package that go alongside this card, and you don't necessarily need the other parts of that deck, or maybe you find a different landfall card.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely perfect in the landfall deck,
yeah.
And then it maybe has application elsewhere is how I sort of see it. So, cool card.
Yeah. All right, so that was my number 8. So what's your number 8? My
number 8, I have Halia, Guided by Light. So this is 2 and a white, 3/3 legendary creature, human soldier. Whenever Halia or another creature or another artifact, whenever Halia or another creature or artifact you control enters, you gain 1 life. At the beginning of your end step, draw a card if you've gained 3 or more life this turn, and it has warp for a single white. So I like this card because it seems pretty easy to... It just seems like a good card on rate, I guess. It's a decently strong body. It has the text where you gain a life, the Soul Warden text, in addition to triggering off artifacts.
Yeah.
And it can draw a card. And then, of course, in older formats, I think it might have potential where if you play it with a lot of cheap artifacts or creatures, then you can fit it in on an early turn and cycle this early, just off of the 1 white. And if you're able to do that, it's kind of free, because then you have this 3/3 that you can bring in later at any time as an adventure, essentially.
Yeah, are there any cards in mind that is there like a card you could spend 1 mana on turn 2 with this, to like get the 3 life by your end step.
On turn 2?
Yeah. I can think of a lot on turn 3. You know, you could crack a candy trail on turn 3, but
not in standard. No, I can't think of.
Yeah,
I was thinking, the artifact decks in modern could do it.
Yeah, you certainly could do it. There's some cards like Blood Fountain is 2 artifacts in 1 card, but I was wondering if there's just like a card that's good that incidentally gains 2 life. You know, that's
right. I can't think of one.
Yeah.
There, you could do it on turn 3 for sure.
Yeah, turn 3 seems. You could even play this with Lightning Helix. You know.
Right. Yeah. There's for a while. In standard, there's always been these sort of tier 3 life gain decks where they play a lot of life gain cards, and so this might help decks like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're doing the thing, this is a powerful card. Just for me, the reason I asked that question is I asked myself this question, and I didn't do a search, but nothing popped at me, you know? So that made me a little skeptical as far as, like, what is this deck going in? But I think, you know, if there is some things going on here, then that's pretty good. And, you know, Soul Warden effects... While pure life gain is not great, it's kind of the same story where incidental life gain on cards that are doing another thing can be really powerful.
Right, for sure. And this one is going to trigger every turn that it's in play if you're playing a life gain deck. I mean, in theory, you know, it could. Yeah. I will admit it's one of those picks that I can't even think of a concrete example of where it would go, but it just seems to me that it has enough going on that it's almost certainly going to be a strong card in some spots somewhere.
Yeah, and you know, you don't have to get the 3 life with its own ability either. Like I said, you know, a 2-power lifelink creature works with this, you know. So
yep, lifelink, other ways to gain life.
Yep.
And of course its ability helps.
Yep.
So
cool.
That's what I've got. We on 7?
Yeah, my number 7 is a card I just added. It's called Nova Hellkite. It's one that people have been pretty excited for, and it's not really the type of card I want to play, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought, yeah, you know, this is probably pretty good. So Nova Hellkite is 3 red for a 4/5 dragon with flying and haste, and when this creature enters, it does 1 damage to target creature an opponent controls, and has warp for 2 and a red. So this is abusing warp with haste and an ETB. So you can play this on 3 and deal 1 to a creature, which might not do anything, but sometimes it will, which makes this amazing. And kind of, you know, play a Boros Charm at your opponent's face, and then it sits there being a 4/5 flying haste dragon later, and that 1 damage might still matter. You might be able to combo this on turn 4 with another removal spell that costs 1, you know, like a shock variant, to deal 3 to something, and that actually matters. But, you know, mostly just being a aggressive kind of red slanted deck. It's kind of costly, which is why I didn't originally make my list, because there's already, you know, Screaming Nemesis and Sunspine Links in standard. But this is a lot of damage in 1 card. So
the way I did this is the way I made my top 10 list is I looked through all the cards, wrote down everything I thought was pretty good, ended up with 23 cards, I think. And then when I went to move them to the top 10, this is one of the first cards I moved up to the top 10. And then as I thought about it, I kept bumping it down. So my favorite thing about this card is that I think if I'm wrong about this card, it's that I'm undervaluing the damage it's doing.
Yeah, it's really going to depend if, you know, like Llanowar Elves becomes an all-star post-rotation or something, or maybe the existence of this keeps it from doing that, you know. But
I actually meant more like the 4 damage.
Oh, okay.
Because I think in my mind, the primary thing you want is you want the first ability to kill a creature, and then you want the advantage to be that you've got this 5-drop waiting to come in and be a dragon, and that's sort of 2-for-1 to them, and then maybe presumably it would kill another creature because that if it was good against their deck the first time.
Yeah, I guess all I'll say is that 5 mana, 4-power flying haste things have seen a lot of play. They usually need decent upside. They don't all see play. You know, there is a Formiridan equipment that didn't see any play at all that, you know, you could move around and equip, but the equip cost I think was so high that was basically just a vanilla 4/4 flying haste. I know it's weird to say vanilla, but, you know, no other lines of text. And also the token could be bounced. And this is like more, I think, going to be a 5-drop in decks that want 5-drops, but kind of has this early buyout to be either a burn spell or ping or pair up with a burn spell later. You know, you don't have to do that on turn 4 either. You know, you could have a 2-mana Lightning Helix and do this on turn 5 to kill a 4 toughness creature, you know.
I remember the days when dragons like this were pretty good in standard. I thought maybe we were past it.
Yeah, certainly the last time it saw play in standard was with Goldspan Dragon, which did a totally different absurd thing of making treasures to tap for 2 mana. So
you're right. And so my thought was that with this was then like, okay, if you're mostly trying to hate 1-mana creatures, it's really good at that, but are you going to play it over Fire Magic?
Yeah, Fire Magic is amazing. It's definitely... you know, it's. I think you want to be a red aggro deck. I think a lot of times these decks end up being like Gruul with a little bit of mana acceleration. There's more that I'm saying to Land Worlds too. There's Deep Cavern Bat or things like that. So it certainly could matter. I guess also, you know, Kaido's kind of a big boogeyman of the format, but if your opponent doesn't plus their Kaido, this can take it down.
That's true.
On curve, so that's not bad.
That's pretty nasty. Yeah. It is good against Planeswalkers. Planeswalkers aren't super popular at the moment, so I just didn't even think of that, but that's a good point. Nice art. I like the art.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool kind of cosmic art in this set I really like. Just a side note, I think this set is looking to be really nice, regardless of how good the cards are. You know, I think it feels like Magic. It's not. I guess people complain that, you know, outlaws and murderers feel like cards and characters in hats, or even Duskmourn is a little off theme. This is like, what if Magic characters were actually in space of the Magic universe itself? And that's kind of what it feels like, and it's kind of cool.
Yeah, the theme is really cool. I've been really impressed with the art. And there's some cool cards, but overall my least favorite thing has been a lot of the cards that I think are cool I don't think have been pushed enough, so that's unfortunate.
Yeah. But, you know, also, this is the first set of a rotation, so maybe in a couple of years, these cards will be some of the better cards in Standard, but, you know, we can't know that now.
That's true. Okay, what are we on? My number 7, right? Okay, I have Siege Ship, Brood Tender. Let me find it. Black-green, 2 mana, 2/3.
Oh, yeah.
When this creature enters, mill 3 cards. Then it has 3 black-green, sacrifice this creature, return target creature or spacecraft card from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery. So I really like this card. Maybe it's because I've been playing too many Unidecks. You could play this on 2 and get a nice little mill in, and then if you hit Una or one of your big enchantment creatures, you could bring them back for 5 mana. And in the meantime, it's a decent body, 2 mana, 2/3. It's much better than other things I consider in that slot, like Township Greeter, which is a 1/1.
Yeah.
And it like doesn't tap to bring something back. So if you just peel this on turn 7 and you have a big bomb in your graveyard, you can bring it back right away. So I think this card is just quite strong and efficient.
Yeah, the Una's a great home for it. That's a good point. I could also see, I mean, I'd probably start some Abzan Unidecks with 4 of this. You know, it's filling a similar role to like Fear Missing Out, but Fear Missing Out scales in a way that cares about combat, which the Unideck doesn't really care about at all. Whereas this scales in a way that's doing something the Unideck already does.
Totally.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and I think in theory you could play it outside of that deck exactly. I just don't know what you would do with it. But it doesn't seem... I mean, people played that stupid... I know it's a 3/2. It was a 3/2, but that red-black vampire 3/2, that...
Blood Tithe Harvester?
Yeah, and I always just remembered thinking, how is this card good? And I think it was because it was just a decent creature that also did, you know, what you wanted.
Yeah, I will say that 2 mana 3/2, like, it adds up a lot in your games of Constructed that is dealing 1 more damage faster, you know?
Yeah, I did have that thought that 3/2 is probably a better body overall. I mean, this is better in a defensive deck.
Yeah, it makes sense in Una, and there might be other homes that, you know, but I think, you know, if you definitely want to be reanimating things, have big things, it's cool that you could play this on 2, play one of your Una ramp spells on 3, and then on turn 4, if you had milled something, you could still just do the thing. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, totally.
I could see this being potentially even a 4 of a Una, but also if it just ends up being a 1 or 2 of a Una, that would make sense to me too, just to kind of fill your 2-drop slots out. Cool. Okay. My number 6 card is Lumincrass Class Frigate. So this is a spacecraft. This first one.
Nice. I don't even know what this is.
1 in the white artifact spacecraft. So spacecrafts have an ability called Station, where it's kind of like Crew. So you tap another creature you control. You only can do it with 1 creature at a time, though you can do it multiple times in a turn. Put charge counters on this equal to the power of the creature you crewed. Station only as a sorcery, and then it'll have a threshold that says it's an artifact creature at a certain number. Not all of them become artifact creatures, but this one does. So it also has another ability. So this one's first ability is with 2 or more charge counters on it. It says other creatures you control get +1/+1. And with 12 or more counters on it, it's a 3/5 flying lifelink. So this is kind of Glorious Anthem-like, but it can come down on turn 2. You need to have a 2-power creature to station it. But if you can do that, you can do that on turn 2. There's a lot of 1-drops in Standard with 2-power, actually, including literal Savannah Lions, but there's better Savannah Lions. So I just think maybe a white weenie deck would be pretty interested in this. You know, getting it to 12 counters sounds like a big deal, but or kind of hard. But, you know, every time you play a creature, you can use it immediately. The creatures don't need to have haste. So as long as you don't care about blocking with those creatures, you can start building this up. And it's giving all those creatures +1/+1, which makes it easier. And flying lifelink 3/5 is like pretty good body if you've been tapping your creatures defensively in a board stall. Maybe you tap some of your creatures, not all of them, to get to this point. And then you don't need to keep crewing it once it has 12 or more charge counters. All the stations work this way, or all the spacecrafts. Like once it's online, it's online. It's not like a thing you need to keep investing resources into. There's a card from Duskmourn called Veteran Survivor. It's got the survivor mechanic, so it's a 1 white for a 2/1, and it says whenever it is on your second main phase and it's tapped, you can exile a card from a graveyard, and as long as 3 or more cards are exiled from a graveyard, it has +3/+3 and hexproof. So that seems pretty synergistic with this because it lets you kind of tap it. Now, unfortunately, if you play that on turn 1 and this on turn 2, there's probably not any cards in graveyard, so you're not going to be able to stack it up until cards hit the graveyard. But kind of late game, it can turn into a 6/5 hexproof. It'll actually be a 7/6. That might be a really good start to a white weenie deck. And I have another white card on my list, actually next on my list. So we'll get to that later. That is also a Savannah Lions with upside.
Nice. I like this card. I could get behind it. It's, I didn't put it on my list because I think there's something going on with my brain with power creep where I'm not quite attuned to it yet. So I'm not sure what things that used to be good aren't good anymore or just haven't been around. And we haven't really had a cheap Anthem around in a while. And we have had anthems that haven't been good. So it's hard for me to tell if anthems aren't aren't good anymore, really. Or if maybe we just haven't had ones on good enough rate. And I mean, this one's a pretty good rate.
Yeah. Another thing, and I'll point out, so I'll read it after yours, but my next card's Lightstall Inquisitor, which is a 2/1 Vigilance for 1 with even more text. But Vigilance is pretty interesting with the station mechanic. You can attack with your creatures and then station it. And kind of a premier potential white weenie card in Standard with Vigilance is Soulstone Sanctuary. So that's another way to kind of get the combats out of your card, but also station your thing.
Yeah. And then I guess against decks where you wouldn't want to make your Anthem vulnerable, you could just not.
You could stop. Yeah.
You could not make it into a creature, yeah. Though it seems like maybe making this into a creature would be best against when you're racing another creature deck, something like that.
Yeah, or like I said, the haste kind of function of it could matter against a control deck too. You could, if you want to play around a sweeper of this, though a lot of the sweepers hit artifacts, to be fair, so you're not really doing that Ultima and the Star Cage, but yeah, it might not be good enough, but I think if there's kind of a traditional white weenie deck that's actually going to be good enough, I would think it would play this card.
Mm-hmm. I don't really like vehicles as a mechanic. I think they've played pretty poorly throughout the years. What do you think about spacecraft? Do you think it's an improvement on them, or?
There are not many of them that I thought were playable. This is the only one on my list, but also even in limited, I'm kind of skeptical of them, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I like them in theory, but I'm not sure about how they've made them. We'll have to see, I suppose. It's a new card type. So while we're at it, you said your next card is that 1 mana 2/1. Why don't you just
okay? Yeah. So this is Lightstall Inquisitor. This is my number 5 card. I'm just pulling it up, but it's a white for a 2/1 Angel Wizard with Vigilance, and when this creature enters, each opponent exiles a card from their hand and may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. Each spell cast this way costs 1 more to cast, and each land played this way is enter tapped. So really strong kind of Savannah Lions type card. The Vigilance, with that spacecraft I just mentioned, you can play this on turn 1, attack with it, and then also turn on your Anthem. So that's pretty cool to me. It taxes a card in their hand. They're always going to get to pick the card in their hand. The tax is very minor. Also, if they have like a Surveil Land or something, they can just exile that and it costs them nothing. But, it's going to build up, especially if you play multiples in the game, that might make the 1 mana might matter. It might not matter, but I think when you're trying to be aggressive, that 1 mana can matter a lot. It's probably won't matter in Standard, though there is Giada in Standard. Being in 1 mana Angel, there's not really anything like that. So that could matter for the Pioneer deck, and maybe a Giada deck. Foundations is going to be in Standard for a while, so there's more opportunities for an Angel deck to arise, and a 1 mana Angel is very unique.
Yeah, when I saw this, I thought it would assuredly go into the Angel deck in Pioneer. Yeah. So I think that's pretty good. People play less tap lands in Pioneer too, so you don't run into that interaction. I don't know. I'm not sure about how much the tax is. It feels like if you're only playing this once and your opponent gets to choose, they're probably the first time they do this, especially if you're just playing on turn 1, they're going to be able to pick something where it basically doesn't really matter. But maybe if you could blink it, or there's another card I wrote down in this set that searches for 1 mana.
It's kind of interesting if they have to hit it with like the Star Cage or Seam Rip and then you get it back. You could get it back in their draw step potentially too in those cases.
So Starfield Shepherd, this isn't on my top 10, but I wrote it down as a card. 3 white, 3/2 flying. When this creature enters, search your library for a basic plains card or a creature card with mana value 1 or less. Reveal it, put it in your hand, and then it has warp 1 and a white. So maybe if you're, if your deck also has this and you're searching out, your plan is to search out and play multiple light stall Inquisitors in a game, that could be really obnoxious.
Yeah, and also when you put 1-drops in your white weenie deck, it's not that weird to draw 2 of them or sometimes even 3 of them. There's going to be games, if this is a deck, there's going to be games where on turns 1 and 2 you've played 3 copies of this card, and then that's actually
that would be absurd. Yeah, for sure. And
not
maybe even 2 is pretty good.
Really what makes it shine, but like you said, stacking it up can just come naturally by putting 4 copies in your deck. And also, I think Vigilance also in aggro mirrors is pretty, it's really valuable. It's kind of boring, honestly, because what ends up happening is if you attack with this and they have a creature that can trade with it, they basically have to.
Right.
Why would they? They're like, they can't really just not attack or block it.
Starfield Shepherd card I just read. Curious what you think about it. It seems like maybe it would combo really well with Ephemerate. Maybe that's not quite enough in a format like Modern, but
yeah, I mean, does it search for a creature with mana value 1 or less, or just 1?
1 or less, or planes.
That always has some interesting applications because there's a lot of combos with Walking Ballista in Modern potentially. People usually use Ranger Captain of Eos, which also kind of gives you some protection because of the silence effect.
Right.
But it could matter.
This card's like card advantage since it's got the adventure aspect to it.
Yeah, I was kind of interested in, there's a blue Sphinx that draws a card and draws 2 cards if you have 1 or less cards in your hand. That was one that kind of interested me with Ephemerate.
Yeah.
But
did I put that guy on my list? I guess I didn't. I really like that card. It's one of my favorite cards. Yeah.
Well, cool. We'll go with your 6 and 5, I guess.
Okay, so my 6 is Terra Symbiosis. I'll find it. I really hate this card. I'm going to read it. I think it's pretty good. So it's 2 and a green enchantment. Whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, you may draw that many cards. Do this only once each turn. So if you play a creature, say, like this other new card that's in the set, Diadrine Synthesis Amalgam.
Is that the X green white card?
Yep.
That was one I took off my list, but yeah.
Yeah, so X green, he's not on my list, but he's really good with this enchantment. When he enters with a number of +1/+1 counters equal the amount of mana you spent to cast it, and his mana cost is X green white. So if you pay only 1 for X, he'll come in with 3 +1/+1 counters. And it has trample, and it has whenever you attack, you may remove a +1/+1 counter from each of 2 creatures you control. If you do, draw a card and create a 2/2 colorless robot. So obviously, if you play that card after you have Terra Symbiosis and play whatever number you spent to cast on it, you're going to draw that many cards.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm a big fan of the idea of playing with Llanowar Elves and Innkeeper's Talent, and both these cards would play very nicely in that type of deck.
I sure thought of that. This seems like a nice card to just throw out there with a Llanowar Elves, and it's going to be really hard for some decks to beat. I kind of hate these enchantments that they just, once they're in play, they're just going to draw a card or 2 turn for the rest of the game.
It's definitely awkward, like the lack of board presence this gives you, but if the rest of your deck is kind of dedicated to it, then that makes sense. Or, it might be a sideboard card in this type of deck we're talking about too, for, these more controlling decks and not so good against the more aggressive decks. But, if you have a talent in play when you play this, then that's, you need a creature too is kind of the issue, but you'll draw a card right away.
Yeah, exactly. Or I imagine there's probably some creatures that put counters on themselves that you could line this up with.
Yeah, I'm sure there's more.
Like when they attack, or Scavenging Ooze comes to mind. It only costs a green.
That's a decent example, but yeah, there's Collector's Cage decks too.
There you go. Yeah, and in general, there's a lot of creatures that come into play with a lot of +1/+1 counters. So a lot of the time, you're going to be drawing more than 1 card with this. I think whenever you have a situation where you have a single card, sort of like the Caretaker's Talent.
Yeah.
Where it sort of spawns its own deck because it just reliably draws so many cards. I think you could probably do that with this, and you might even be able to put it in a deck that you wouldn't normally be able to play, or you might be able to put it in a deck that has a different plan than most +1/+1 counter creature decks. Like maybe you can play more removal and be more mid-rangey than normal because it provides so many cards.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
it's a delicate balance, but I see your point.
Yeah, and then alongside it, I'm going to mention another card that adds a lot of counters that I think is good, but I didn't put on the list, and it's called Oru Boroid. 2 green, 1/3 creature. It's a mythic. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put X +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, where X is this creature's power.
Yeah, and it scales to itself. It pumps itself. Notably, it doesn't matter how many creatures you have. It's only going to draw you that X cards with this card, I think.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Because it says on a creature you control, do this once. So
that makes sense.
It doesn't matter that multiple instances are happening exactly at the same time. You still can only really have it happen for one of them.
Well, I think Ouroboros probably still good, but that's not as crazy as I thought it was. I thought if you just had a lot of creatures out, you would just
immediately draw a bunch. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Ouroboros is similar to Alana and Elena, I think it was called.
Yeah, and that card's instant.
And that card was pretty good.
It gets a 2/4, and if you have Innkeeper's Talent, you could stack those triggers, so it gets a counter from talent first, and then puts 2 counters on all your things.
Yeah, or I could see lining this up pretty nicely with Bristly Bill, or maybe, in theory, you could use a pump spell on it.
Yeah, I mean, drawing only one card is not amazing, but I guess the Chocobo, if you can trigger things on your opponent's turn, you can get cards too.
There you go.
All right, well, that was your number 6, right? So what's your number 5? Mine was the 1-mana Angel.
Number 5, I have Umbral Collar Zealot.
Okay, that was the last thing I cut from my list.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure where to put it, and maybe I put it too high, but the point is that I like it, and I think it fills a role.
Yeah.
So let me find it. I'm going to read it. So it's 1 and a black, 3/2, Human Cleric. Sacrifice another creature or artifact, Surveil 1. And so this is an ungated sacrifice outlet, which we have not had a good one in Standard, really. When people were building Sephiroth decks, when that came out, they were playing the black-white vampire.
Yeah,
but that card's quite a bit worse than this, I would say.
Yeah, which is legendary, harder to cast, forces you into playing white, which there's a decent chance most Sephiroth decks, I think, are going to be white, because there's a lot of synergy there. But either way...
Red's a pretty good pairing with him, too.
Yeah, that's true. So this would open up some more options. And, it's funny because it reminds me of Osiris here, but Scry 1 compared to Surveil 1, when you're doing it a lot of times, is a big deal. Like, this can mill Bloodghast and things like that. And
there's a Bloodghast-esque card in this set.
Yeah, well, Bloodghast is also an Aether Drift. It's just in Standard.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I put one in my Cauldron deck for a little bit.
Nice.
Yeah, so... even with Cauldron, this is an activated ability that you could put under Cauldron, and it could mill you into more activated abilities for Cauldron. The ability to, also if there's some kind of infinite loop, a lot of infinite loop sack outlets, maybe if you don't have a Sephiroth, don't have a win con, but maybe you can mill a win con if you can mill your whole deck,
Totally. Good with flashback cards. It has that Blood Tithe Harvester thing going where it's just a 2-mana 3/2.
Definitely. I mean, that's a big deal compared to the white-black legend, even though that one grows to be bigger. This, these white-black, or not white-black, but these sack aggro decks, they're trying to play to the board and do a lot of chip damage. So you don't want to have to commit sacking something to grow your thing necessarily. It's nice that this can just start hitting for decent chunks of damage.
Right. And then I think it's non-zero that it sacks artifacts. There's cards in this set, some red cards that produce lots of artifacts, and there's even some artifacts in the set that when you sacrifice them, there's benefits.
It is non-zero for what it's worth. The Rivals of Ixalan Legend also does that. Or not Rivals, but LCI Legend. Okay,
yeah. So, yeah. I think this card is probably going to show up a lot. I mean, maybe. If the Aristocrat style deck... There's quite a few cards for the Aristocrat style deck in this set, and some cards that were good against who are rotating. So if it's not good now, maybe it just won't be good. But... yeah. We will see. They've also got this nice removal spell that I think neither of us put on our list, so I'll mention. It's Tragic Trajectory Sorcery for a single black. Target creature gets -2/-2, but it has Void, which triggers if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn or if a spell was warped. And it does -10/-10 in that case. So this card, not being an instant, probably won't fit in a lot of decks, but it fits kind of nicely in a deck where you could reliably sacrifice things, I would say, especially since the first half of it isn't terrible if you can't sacrifice something. But
yeah, No, I
And
agree.
there you go.
Cool.
What's your next one?
All right, number 4. I'm going to be shocked if this isn't on your list. This is consult the star charts. Oh.
Yeah, you would be shocked for sure.
Okay. So this is 1 in the blue for an instant, and it has kicker for 1 in the blue. So it either costs 2 or 4 mana. It says, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of lands you control. Put 1 of those cards into your hand. If this spell was kicked, put 2 of those cards in your hand instead. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So on curve, this could be a 2 mana close to anticipate. That's not amazing. But the 4 mana mode is, similar to Memory Deluge. But it scales into the late game. When you're playing a control deck, on turn 8 or whatever, this looks at your top 8 cards. So it's just a lot more of a look. It's an instant, so that's a big deal. The 2 mana mode definitely will matter. Maybe it's turn 7 and you're only out to this game as Ultima, and you get to look at your top 7 cards for 2 mana. So I think the 2 mana mode, weirdly, if you're trying to hit your land drops, it's going to matter on turn 2. But for the most part, it's only going to matter, I think, when you are digging for a more expensive card very specifically. And you still get to look the same number of cards without kicking it. You just get 1 less card.
Yeah, so I put this as number 1.
Okay.
I just think it's so unlikely to not just be a really good card that I figured I'd put it at number 1.
I do think it's going to see play. I think the thing that kept me from putting it higher on my list is that there's a lot of really good card advantage spells in Standard, including Stock Up. And, this is unique, and it might be the best one. But if this card didn't exist in Standard, I wonder how much, if it would really change what decks are good or bad.
That's a good point. I think it'll see play regardless, though. Yeah. It's kind of like if you had lots of good black removal, each individual black removal wouldn't be as important, but you'd probably still play each one for its different use cases and whatnot. It's kind of like that here. Whereas Stock Up obviously might be better in some decks, but some decks will prefer this, and some decks will just play both because they're both really good.
I guess to add, it being a kicker card that costs 2, it matters for Shuko. You can kick it if you have the extra 2 mana when you cast it from your graveyard, and also you have the option of just targeting it with that card even if you don't.
Wait, what's Shuko?
Sorry.
Oh, Shiko.
Yeah.
It's pretty good with Shiko.
Yeah, it's not as good as Stock Up, but it's still just another. If it costs 4, you could never target it. So
exactly, yeah,
it's still something.
Yeah, it's extremely flexible. It's instant speed. It is sometimes better than Stock Up.
It's probably going to mean there's a lot less Meringue River region running around.
Yeah, that's my least favorite part about the card is that...
That's where it's really competing. It's with Coil and Touch.
It's much better than Meringue River region. You might still end up with 1 or 2 Meringues in your deck because the creature is pretty good. Yeah, or because the dragon matters. But yeah, I love Meringue River Regent, but I'm pretty sure I'd rather have this max out on copies of this first. So. All
right, well, I'm not shocked that was your number 1.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
All right. You're 4.
Okay, I have Siege Ship Impact. Really boring. Let me go find it. So it's 1 and a green, instant, destroy target artifact or enchantment. If its mana value was 2 or less, create a lander token.
Yeah, that's definitely really good.
Yeah, I like that. I think getting the lander token in some decks is going to be so good that you're probably going to board this in if your opponent, if it's good at all, your opponent. You're going to be looking for 2 mana things to kill from them.
Yeah.
To get the lander token, because I think even if against something like Prof's Identic Memory, you really would never board in a disenchant to try to kill that, or maybe you would, but you wouldn't be happy about it. And this, at least, you could actually safely feel like you can bring that in, kill it, and then you get your instant speed rampant growth, and everything is okay in the world.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's a lot of weird, good disenchants in Standard right now, even in green particularly, and this one is the best if you need a disenchant. If you need to kill artifacts and enchantments, this is the best one. But there's Paw Patch Formation, which can hit flying creatures, or if you care about drawing cards or making food, there's Pick Your Poison, which costs 1 less and can hit flying creatures, but is not really good at hitting specific things. And then there's Heritage Reclamation, which is Graveyard Hate. So it's pretty interesting. But if what you care about is killing artifacts or enchantments, and more specifically ones that cost 1 or 2 mana, then this is what you'll be playing.
Yeah, totally. And I did think about those other cards, and I think overall, while we're not going to see this 100% of the time over those, I think most of the time we're going to see this
it's not
option.
Locked into 2 or less. That's what's nice. It still kills a Pinnacle Star Cage or whatever.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, that's important.
That's important.
Yeah. I wouldn't play it just for that reason.
Yeah.
But there's been so many good, 1 and 2 mana enchantments, and sometimes your opponent we'll have like an enchantment creature or artifact creature that costs 1 or 2, and just being able to hit that and make a lander token, I just think it's clearly a pretty strong card.
Cool. Yeah.
As boring as that may be for a top 5 or whatever.
Yep.
Did we do your number 4 already? I've lost track.
Yeah, my number 4 was Consult.
Okay, so my number 3.
Yeah, my number.
My number 3 is already done because that was Pinnacle Stargate.
Okay, so my number 3 is Pinnacle Emissary. This is 1 blue-red for a 3/3 artifact creature robot. It says, whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless drone artifact creature token with flying, and this token can only block creatures with flying. And it has warp for a hybrid blue-red. So 1 mana. This is mostly a modern card in my mind. If you warp this on turn 1 and cast a Mox Opal, it gives you a drone, and then you can tap the Mox Opal for mana. So it single-handedly enables it. And it's not just that, right? It's going to go to its exile and be a thing later. In Modern Horizons 3, they printed Kappa Cannoneer, and that, I think this card is giving Kappa Cannoneer and Thought Monitor a ton of help. If you play this on turn 1 with a Mox Opal, and then you use the mana for Mox Opal to play like a 1-mana artifact, or maybe you just have a Mishra's Bauble and you don't have anything else, or Tamio or Emery also come to mind, you can play Kappa Cannoneer with a land on turn 2, and things like that. You'll have gotten 2 drones and the 2 artifacts you've played, so Kappa Cannoneer costs 6 with Improvise. I just think this is really going to see a home in specifically a deck with like Kappa Cannoneer and Thought Monitor. It's just a ton of artifacts. It works on turn 1 so well. These decks have 12 0-drops or more sometimes, and there's even weird ways you could play a turn 1 Kappa Cannoneer with this, which is crazy. And then I'm mostly looking at the warp cost here, but like I said, you play this with warp and it's still there for later.
Cool card.
Yeah.
I was trying to think about whether this card would be good in Standard, and I basically couldn't think of a deck that could muster enough artifact spells, because you have to cast artifact spells to get it to trigger, and then also the creatures can't block. So I'm glad. It certainly
shines with 0-mana artifacts, which are some of the strongest things in Modern right now, and not really a thing that's accessible in Standard or Pioneer at all.
Right, and just in general, strong, cheap artifacts, which there's just not a... And this you also need a critical mass of artifacts in your deck, really, for something like this.
There might even be weird combos with this. The warp cost is also hybrids, and these decks have Mox Opal, so you don't even have to be a blue-red deck. You could be a blue or red deck and have Mox Opal be the way that you cast the other half of this.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay. Well, that all sounds pretty nice. Obviously, I wasn't really thinking about Modern, but
yeah,
that's nice. On to number 2.
Yeah, so mine was Seam Rip, which we already talked about.
Oh, gotcha.
Pretty boring.
Okay, yours? I've got a cool one. Cool. I've got Honor.
Cool, yeah.
1 white. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Draw a card. And seems good to me. Seems like there's
this
that
blue name in on a card that is pretty simple and still going to be good.
Yeah, this card's cool enough that maybe I'm giving it bonus points for being cool, but whatever. Immediately I think of all the different applications it could have. So I can think of the green +1/+1 counter synergies in this set, and in others I can think of Valiant triggers. I can think of when I was playing Pioneer in the past, there was I think Heroic. There was good Heroic decks. This would be good with that. So I mean, we're kind of just hitting the whole spectrum. Oh, in Standard recently, there's been this like blue-white prowess type of deck that utilizes Cloud to go get Astrologer's Planisphere.
Yeah.
And I could see this fitting in there. Obviously, 1 mana cantrip's historically really good, and putting a counter on a creature has a lot of implications. So I think
if you care about putting counters on your creatures or targeting your creatures, this is just going to be one of the better cards. I'm curious if it'll see play in the Pioneer Heroic deck. That deck has kind of fell by the wayside, but that card has a similar card. I don't know if you know it. I forget what it's even called. It might even have Honored in the name, but it's 1 white to put a counter on a creature at sorcery speed, and it also has flashback for a white. So,
yeah, I know that card.
Yeah,
this draws a card.
Yeah,
nice.
The draw card part, certainly in Standard, you don't have the option of the other card anyways, so and it might be nicer.
Yeah.
Something like Planisphere, that the drawing card matters. Planisphere triggers if you draw a 3rd card in a turn, which is a lesser known part of that card, but it does matter.
It's so efficient. It's about as cheap as you could get with having it does about as much as you could ask, since it's 1 mana and draws a card. So I think it's a card that is likely to see play for a long time in certain spots, depending on what cards get printed and things like that. So I'm happy to have it pretty high on the list.
Cool. All right. So my number 1 card was maybe supposed to just be Seam Rip, but I've been thinking about this card more and more, and I think it's super cool, and I'm really hoping it's going to see play.
Okay, I'm ready.
That card is Anti-Causal Vestige.
Wow.
So
I did not expect that. Okay.
This is a 6 mana Eldrazi, so it has no colored pips or even colorless pips. It's a 7/5. It says when this creature leaves the battlefield, draw a card, then you may put a permanent card with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, and it has Warp for 4. So the first spot I thought this card was in Modern, and comically in Modern, I think this card would be better if it cost 1 more mana, because then you could exile it to Ugin's Labyrinth and have that be a soul land. That being said, this card, putting a permanent with mana value less the number of lands you control and play tapped is kind of weird in an Eldrazi deck, but it can still put lands into play. So it's kind of like an Explorer. And also sometimes will be better than an Explorer because you can put in other Eldrazi. The Warp 4 is, what I'm looking at here, but there's kind of an interesting thing. This is a 7/5. And Warp isn't like a one-shot thing. Like, you have the whole turn to use the 7/5. Notably, in just an Eldrazi synergy, there's Eldrazi Mimic, which would become a 7/5 if you warped this. There's Eldrazi Linebreaker, which gives +X/+0 and haste to an Eldrazi at the beginning of combat you control, equal to the number of Eldrazi you control, so you can give this haste. So I think there might be an Eldrazi kind of aggro deck. There already is kind of a deck that might be pretty interested in this, and maybe you just skip on the Labyrinth part of that deck entirely, then stay a bit lower to the ground and just use Temple. Then, I think probably in the big Eldrazi ramp deck, it's a bit worse than Sowing Microspawn or Chrysalis. But, I'm saying all this stuff based on just the warp thing, but you still get like the 6-drop when you do that. Like, it draws a card and it draws itself in a way, and then you put something into play, which later in the game could be worth more mana. And then I think there's a shot this could see play in Standard. Obviously, there's not going to be an Eldrazi synergy, but you could warp this, and, if you put in a 4-drop, then you're saving, you're staying on the same amount of mana. That's kind of clunky. But also I was thinking you could warp this, and if you put in a land, like kind of a worst case scenario, then next turn you could cast this, and if it died, it could put in itself if you have another copy in your hand. Like if you have a second copy.
If you have a second one.
Yeah, if you have 6 lands, then,
Okay. Boy. I read this card 7 times, I think, trying to figure out what to do with it.
Being a 7/5 to give haste or station your things or sack for value could matter in Standard or Pioneer too.
Yeah, but it's going to take someone craftier than me to figure this out, I guess. Because where I ultimately came down on it was, okay, so let's say I pay 4 mana. I had a card I wanted to play anyway, so I play that card, that 4-drop, and I've been gifted this free Anti-Casual Vestige that I can play later. But then I thought, well, what if this card didn't have the warp cost and just was 6 mana, 7/5, and it had all its abilities, but also when it came into play, it drew a card? And I was like, I don't even know if that would be good. And that's kind of what you're doing when you get the big payoff.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends. Like I said, I think, if you had a bunch of these in your deck, then it could put in another copy of itself. But, I mean, really, what I'm optimistic for, and I don't think this will be a Tier 1 Modern deck, but I do think, like, the Eldrazi Mimic, Eldrazi Linebreaker thing is pretty appealing.
All right. I didn't. The Eldrazi deck, I even thought about that briefly, and I was like, well, it's 6, so it's not 7.
Yeah.
And then I did think that, like, and if you're ramping it out, then you get smaller stuff. But I guess if you're making it pretty cheap, then you just put in a land, and you're pretty happy with that. Yeah, I really don't know on this one, man.
Yeah, it's really weird.
Maybe. Interesting. Okay, well.
Your number 1 is Consult the Star Charts.
Is Consult the Star Charts, yeah. And maybe my bias is playing a bit there, but I think it's just so clearly going to be a decent card.
Yeah.
Almost no matter what, that I was pretty happy, like I said, putting it number 1. It's funny because there's so many other cards I liked. I'll mention a card I really liked from the set that I didn't even think would be good, was the one you mentioned briefly, but we didn't read it. Was Quantum Riddler, the 3 blue flying 4/6 Sphinx. When this creature enters, draw a card, has warp 1 and a blue, but then it also has a bonus ability where if you play this, or when you trigger this, if you only have 1 or fewer cards in hand, you draw 1 more card.
It's not only that, right? It's if you would draw a card with Winterfew, right?
Oh yeah, so while it's sitting in play,
Yeah.
and if you would draw a card at any point while having a small
Yeah.
hand, you draw that many plus one.
Obviously, if you so something to note about warp is you have to wait till the end step. So if you top deck this, there's a chance you don't actually want to warp it if you already had 7 mana or 5 mana. You might just want to get the body in right away. But you can get more cards off of it, or you can warp this on turn 2, just cycle it, and then later play it, and it gets another card. It's a Moldrifter, but it's a 4/6 flying, and it might even be better than Moldrifter if you were Hellbent by the time you play it, though. That's a little tough to do if you warped this on 2 to cycle it, because you're not developing your hand into play.
Yeah, but it's sorcery speed to do that.
Yeah, I guess Lily on the Veil is rotating, but all these warp cards are very funny against Lily on the Veil because they kind of sit in your hands, but not really your hands, which is kind of nice. Anyways, yeah, I was looking at all the warp cards for the black-white Ephemerate deck in Modern, and this was the one that I thought would be the best, and that deck's already splashing blue for Consign to Memory and Psychic Frog. I think I've mentioned this before, but a consensus I've heard a few times is splashing for Consign to Memory in that deck is nice, and splashing for Psychic Frog, that's up for debate.
Yeah.
Yeah, that deck has Witch Enchanters and Basic Planes that are both really important parts of that deck. But splashing for Consign is pretty nice, especially because the Eldrazi decks, I think, are tougher for that deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this card's really good with Ephemerate.
And, I think it's weird to say you're splashing for a double blue card, but in Modern, that's fine. By the time you're at turn 5, having double blue is going to be fine. And also, the whole point of this is that you, play your Philia on turn 2, and you warp this on turn 3, and you just get a couple cards, and the 4/6s in play already.
Yeah. And, my initial thought with this was, if you're going to play the kind of deck that would play this, probably wouldn't be that super interested in the big creature because it would just die to your opponent's removal that was sitting in their hands. But I guess a lot of the control decks nowadays have a lot of big creatures in them already. So maybe you could put one of this, even as it might have a high impact as a one of in your deck, because sometimes you'll play it on, you probably don't want to draw too many, but if you draw it and you can fit it in, then you just have this nice effect sitting in exile in case you're ever low on cards. So maybe. I like the art too. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Well, that'll do it for today's episode, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. I thought we would, as a sign-off, check back in on our last top 10, how we did for Final Fantasy, just real briefly, to see how we did. I know I definitely missed some things, and I did okay on some others. How do you think you did in general on your top 10 from last time?
Well, I think my number 1 was spot on in VV.
Oh, yeah, you had VV.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably about right.
The Cauldron, I think I mentioned the Cauldron thing, but that ended up, now, obviously, before the Pro Tour, there was really just a prowess thing, and it's still just a prowess thing, but the Cauldron thing ended up being really powerful, and the best shell ended up being to not try to do some weird combo with Geralf, but just to say, well, I'm just going to put a counter on my Fear of Missing Out or my Tersa, and it's already going to have a lot of power. And then Prophesied Eidetic Memory gives these things even more power, and also it turned out having a VV under Cauldron and playing another VV was a good combo too.
Yeah, I underestimated how good VV would be outside of very specific modern things or things like that. I mean, it ended up being really good in Standard. I don't think I expected that.
Comically, I pointed out the Modern deck I thought it would be good in, and I tried that deck, and I mentioned this, and I hate VV in that deck. So
right.
That deck does not need more mana. I saw a list recently that had 4 Flame of Venor and 4 Expressive Iteration, and just as a side note, that's probably close to where I'd want to be if I played that deck again. Just things to use your mana on, not things that make more mana. It had 0 VVs, to be clear, just more card draw.
Right. And then I embarrassingly had the Adventure Lands as my number 1, which, after playing with them, they're not even that good and limited. a lot of them.
The green one, I think, is a total bomb in draft, because you can rebuy it, and also it combos with Kina to make 2 copies of that token, if you didn't know. But
they're good and limited. But even the red one isn't very good and limited.
Yeah, mostly. I meant I take the green one extremely highly, whereas the other ones are cards I put in my deck when I get them, and I'm that color. But the green one, I'll pack one, pick one really happily because of Chocobo pick mostly.
In my defense, I added them to my list an hour before because I figured we wouldn't talk about lands, and then I guess my brain just shortcutted cool land that does something else has to be good in Standard. I don't know. I clearly didn't think about it enough because they're not very good. I had Starting Town as number 2. I'm pretty happy with that. I think Starting Town has been good when I've played it.
It's probably going to matter more after rotation.
With rotation, and I had that in mind too.
Yeah. So I had Saz's Chocobo as my number 2. there's a landfall deck now. I tried the domain deck in Modern, didn't like that deck or Chocobo, so.
Chocobo's really good though. Whenever you play a deck in Standard and Chocobo's in it, it's one of the deck's best cards.
Yeah, I agree. In the landfall deck, I like it more than all the other payoffs, more than Tifa, Bristly Bill, or the Hydra. It's my favorite of the landfall payoffs.
Totally. I had Sephiroth on the list. I think you did too, and Cloud.
I think Sephiroth I had 4th. You had it 3rd or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Which
we
funny.
Both agreed it was the coolest card in the set. I probably still think that.
Yeah. I might like Esper Origins now the most. I think that might be my favorite card.
Yeah, neither of us had that on our list, which is a miss, and moving forward might become more of a miss.
Such a strong card. I did catch on to it decently quick after, but yeah.
Cecil wasn't as good as I thought, but it's still seeing play. It's kind of hard to play a lot of copies of it.
Good.
It's felt good to me when I've tried the blue-black deck, but it's pretty funny card where in some matchups you don't attack with it, but the fact that it's really hard to block when you do have the Kaido or the Curiosity is really nice, but you don't randomly just attack with it to make each player lose 2 life if you're not getting any value off it. And then I'm not sure these decks are great, but I've seen some resurgence in Death Shadow Modern decks, and that makes sense that he'd see some play in it. Once again, I don't know if I could really play more than 1 or 2 copies of it, but if you play it on turn 1, you could always with Street Wraiths get a Shadow down on turn 2 or play 2 Thoughtseizes, but this is another way to lose 2 life before your second turn and get the Shadow down 1 turn sooner.
Yeah, I will say, even though he wasn't on my top 10, I still feel like he's about as good as I thought he was.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Cloud, I've seen Cloud see play in some Eternal formats and then in Standard to some success in a blue-white deck, and it seemed pretty good. So
yeah, and then when I put it on Cloud, I mentioned Pioneer, and I've been seeing it top 8 the challenges in exactly a hammer deck. So that came true. Raban has not really been seeing as much play. It did at first. Comically, the card I thought Raban would replace is, I forget its name, but it's an ogre for 2 and a red for a 3/2. And it's sorcery speed. You can pay 0 mana to attach an equipment you control to it. And that's still been seeing play. And when I thought about it, these decks are also Quarry Steelcutter decks. So the fact that you can play this and equip a hammer and a cutter to it immediately makes sense to me. Why that's the one seeing play still.
Gotcha.
You can just give it haste. For 3 mana, you can have a 14 power trample haste on that board potentially.
As for Sephiroth, do you think it's still a good card and it just needs to find a home, or do you think maybe that sort of card's just not good?
It's also, it's been seeing play in the Brood Scale deck in Modern, the Yawgmoth deck. It's seeing some play in Modern where the sack outlets are more abundant, and I think talk about this more in the next episode, but Mardu is a color combination that I think is going to have some really good mana moving forward, and I do think Voice of Victory is one of the best cards you can play with Sephiroth. I think that's true in Modern too. We've seen the Boros Energy tech splash it. So yeah, I would say that's definitely been a hit, and I kind of have even higher hopes for the card than what it's showing now.
All right. Let's see. I had Ultima. Ultima's pretty good.
Yeah.
I had Joshua, Phoenix's Dominant, kind of a pet card of mine. I guess it's not really up to par.
It's seeing fringe play. Your home of Jeskai Control, I've been seeing people do it in, and I just disagree. I just want Rediscover the Ways in that slot for my Shiko.
Yeah, that's probably better. It's kind of nice in Naya Yuna as a 1 or 2 of to get rid of Esper Origins out of your hand and whatnot.
Yeah, and Monument will still be legal for a while, so there might be another Boros Monument deck popping up. But the card that lets you discard cards, Guardian of New Benalia is rotating, so that might be tough.
I had Yuna on my list pretty low. I would definitely have moved it up.
Yeah. Yuna was a good hit.
I'm glad that's on my list.
I had Matoya, which has not really been doing the thing, but I've seen people try it.
Yeah. That's the 1/4 that whenever you scry or surveil, you draw a card. Yeah.
Yep. I had Fire Magic, which I think is a huge hit.
Oh, totally. I had it on my honorable mention, but I thought it would be more of a niche cyber card than it is. I feel like it's just a really strong cyber card and maybe even a main deck card. So.
Well, yeah, in this post-ban world, it's become a main deck card because the blue-black deck is filled with so many X1s. And, I mentioned this, I think, when it happened, but, this kills Dark Confidant for 1 mana or whatever. It kills a bat for 1 mana. You don't have to have it be a sweeper for it to be good. Playing 1 mana to kill something is fine.
Totally.
And then,
yeah. The last couple cards I had Nibelheim of Flame. Maybe that should have been an honorable mention. I never thought it was going to be that good, but I just thought it was maybe kind of an underrated card. Maybe it'll never see play. We'll see.
My last
and
card
then
was...
I had Emmett Selch, which still seems like a strong card to me in exactly the role I said it would be. A deck like that hasn't existed, but maybe it could after some... There's actually some new cards that fit well with it, so we'll see.
Yeah, And like the need for Death Touch on Preacher of the Schism has dropped down too, or things like that. I still think you want to be reanimating things, but
yeah,
I think things might change around. I had Tifa on my list, which I guess was also a hit in Standard, which is surprising. I will say, having played that Landfall deck, I'm in a weird spot with that deck where I don't really like Tifa, and I don't really like that it forces you to play pump spells. In fact, when I've been playing it, this card's going to rotate, but I've been playing Audacity, which is like the 1-mana aura that gives +2/+0 trample, and when the aura dies, you draw a card. Funny story about that. My opponent cast Ultima, and I still drew a card, and I realized like it ends the turn, and then the aura dies, because that's how it works. Like, because it doesn't kill the aura. It's kind of funny, but anyways, Tifa is a card that costs less than 3 mana in those landfall decks, so I'm still somewhat interested because a lot of the best cards in that deck end up being really clunky, and so also you're a mono green deck, so or maybe splashing a color, so ending the game quickly is definitely in your interest, and Tifa can do a good job of that. More recently, I've been like interested in using your Innkeeper's Talent, which is not perfect, but still pretty. Just a powerful card that pumps your power.
Yeah, it seems reasonable to play Tifa and not even try to protect it, to be honest. And just like sometimes it kills them and sometimes they kill it, and it's not a big deal because it's only 2 mana.
Protecting it is definitely less important than like having a way to grow its power. And Snake's Veil certainly does both, but it doesn't do as good of a job as things that just can pump its power.
Yeah, and there's both in the new set. There's both a few things that are threats on their own and can pump things power. So maybe that deck can stop playing crappy pump spells and it can just play some of those.
Yeah, the Ice Tail Explorer, if you have one of your Fabled Passages or Escape Tunnels, then all of a sudden you get 4 Tifa triggers a turn for as long as you have that in play. So
yep. Do you think splashing white for maybe Get Lost and then like Honor would be any good?
Probably not Honor. I mean, I really think Innkeeper's Talent is like the way to go. The deck has a lot of counter synergies anyways, and like it has a lot of mana, so you can fully level it. You can draw like a Saz's Chocobo later in the game, and its landfall trigger is effectively doubled, and it's just going to get huge. A deck like that just really needs all of its threats to be potent. I think Innkeeper's Talent is actually like a card that's not seeing playing in it that is kind of perfect, and it's even better now that Lockdown is rotated for a card that doesn't hit Innkeeper's Talent specifically in the Star Cage. I'm pretty excited to keep working on that deck. And yeah, the whites, I think you can for sure splash one color almost for free. I've even played against a list that had stock up on the splash, which I thought was funny.
It's not the worst city in the world.
Yeah, I like white for Get Lost and some sideboard copies, potentially of Felidar Retreat, though they're printing some more expensive cards. Felidar Retreat is 3 and a white for an enchantment. It's from the Foundation's like extra cards. Landfall, choose one, make a 2/2 cat, or put a +1/+ counter on each creature you control that gain vigilance until end of turn.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, I think this will be, every time we do our top 10, we can look back at our last top 10.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's hard to predict the future. You can have a good top 10 in a vacuum and have not predicted where the format was going to go, and then it'll make it seem wrong or things of that nature. So don't hold us to account for it too badly, except maybe if you put Adventurelands as number 1, you could probably get scolded for that.
It's all right. I put a stupid Eldrazi number 1 this time, and you put...
Oh, yeah, you're going to be wrong about that.
We switched places on our number 1 this time, where we put an unplayable card at number 1 and the best card in the set at number 1. So.
Perfect.